Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to 90 Day Fiancé latest news. The word that Julia Trubkina was pregnant spread well beyond the 90 Day Fiancé cult. For years, viewers had watched her deal with the cultural changes that came with leaving Russia, the difficulties of moving to rural Virginia, the difficult balancing act of becoming independent while still being part of Brandon Gibbs's close-knit family, and the emotional stress of not knowing if she would ever be able to be a mother. There had always been twists and turns in her story, as well as doubts and determination. The news that she was pregnant was not just a big deal in her personal life, but also the end of a journey that many fans had followed intently. It was a sign of strength and love that seemed like it belonged to anyone who had ever cheered for her. Like so many current life announcements, the unveiling happened on social media. Julia and Brandon posted a simple but eye-catching picture on Instagram. It showed ultrasound pictures, her sweet grin, and his arm protectively across her shoulders. A full caption wasn't necessary. The picture spoke louder than words. Fans from all across the world started sending in their congrats within minutes. Headlines came out right away, and reality TV news outlets rushed to highlight the happiness of this news. Julia's revelation wasn't simply news about entertainment. It was also a sign of how far she and Brandon had come since they first appeared on screens. The pregnancy was a sign of an enduring commitment that had overcome the problems of distance, cultural differences, and familial expectations that many others had worried about their relationship being able to handle. To comprehend the profound resonance of this moment, it is essential to revisit Julia's presentation to the American audience. She came to 90 Day Fiancé as a vibrant, ambitious, and occasionally angry young woman who left her life in Russia to establish a future with Brandon, a quiet, family-oriented man whose life was based on the traditions of small-town America. The Gibbs family farm in Virginia was the setting for their courtship on screen. Julia had to become used to a new culture and a rural lifestyle that was very different from the city life she was used to. In the beginning of their relationship, they fought a lot about what they expected from each other, their duties, and their freedom. Julia regularly complained to Brandon's parents about tasks on the farm and the rules they had to follow. Brandon, on the other hand, had a hard time balancing his allegiance to his family with his love for her. But these problems showed how deeply they were committed. People who were paying attention could see that there was a real connection between the two people under the tension. Julia's outspoken and unvarnished nature and Brandon's steady disposition made for a relationship that was both hard and helpful. As time went on, their love story became less about the fights they had and more about how strong they were for staying together. Julia had a hard time adjusting, and Brandon had a hard time finding a balance between his family's traditions and his partner's need for independence, but they always came back to each other. Viewers praised their marriage as one of the more real marriages to come out of the series. It showed that opposites can create balance when they are based on real love. But Julia had always been touchy about the topic of kids. Julia was honest about her doubts about starting a family, unlike several other couples on the show who were anxious to do so. She wanted to make a name for herself, see what was out there for her, and make sure she was ready for the responsibilities of being a parent. Medical worries that were always there made such feelings much more complicated. At one point, she informed her audience about the unpleasant recollection of going to a doctor in Russia and being warned that getting pregnant might be very hard for her. That revelation was very hard for her to deal with, especially when she and Brandon talked about their future. She wanted to be a mother, but she also frightened it. It was a dream that felt out of reach, even if it was in her heart. This is why the announcement of the pregnancy was so strong. It wasn't just a famous couple sharing private information. It was a public recognition of victory over doubt. The ultrasound pictures were a sign of hope come true for Julia, who had once worried if she would ever be able to be a mother. For Brandon, who had been there for her through those misgivings, it was the confirmation of a shared future that they had both wanted but weren't sure they could trust in. For supporters, it was a chance to celebrate not just a pregnancy, but also the strength of two individuals who had battled real problems and decided to stay together time and time again. The weeks after the news showed a couple going through a change. Their home, which used to be set up to fit the rhythm of their adult lives together, started to change in small ways to be ready for the baby. Julia, who is always full of enthusiasm, poured herself into planning, from looking up baby supplies to drawing designs for a nursery. Brandon, who is known for being down-to-earth, took on the role of constant support, making sure that the practical parts of being a parent were taken care of. They went through the first few months of pregnancy with a mix of enthusiasm and caution, knowing that this part of their lives would bring both good and bad times. Visits to the doctor became important events. Julia felt a deep connection to her baby when she heard its heartbeat for the first time. It was no longer just a dream, it was real. Brandon, who was sitting next to her, felt the same astonishment. These events, which were typically recorded in private photos or short diary entries, were the silent story behind the big social media festivities. They weren't famous people, they were just two expectant parents going through the same feelings of excitement, optimism, and love that everyone else has. But the people stayed very interested. Fan clubs and online forums for 90 Day Fiancé were buzzing with talk about the pregnancy. Some others were amazed at how far the pair had come since they first appeared on TV. People who experienced their own fertility problems were especially inspired by Julia's path. For a lot of people, the news was more than just entertainment. It was a story of strength that connected with their own lives. Julia's prior comments regarding her anxieties of not being able to have children were brought up by the media, which was a contrast to her current happiness at being pregnant. The story that came out was one of overcoming obstacles, a topic that is always relevant across countries and situations. Julia and Brandon fought hard to keep their privacy, even though they were in the public eye. They talked about parts of their adventure, but they kept a lot of the facts to themselves. This balance showed how much they had changed since their time on reality TV. They used to be very careful about what they said about their relationship, but now they are more guarded about what they say in public. By doing this, they kept control of their story and made sure that the first chapter of their child's life would be one written with purpose instead of exposure. Preparations were still going on inside their house. The nursery turned into a fantasy painting. Julia liked soft colors and playful accents because they made her think of a welcoming place that would welcome fresh life. Brandon was practical and thoughtful, and he paid attention to the little things that would make the area safe and useful. They put money into more than simply furnishings and decorations. They also changed the mood of the place. They wanted it to be a safe place where love could be felt everywhere. Even though this process was full of the usual worries that come with being pregnant, it also brought them closer together. Every choice they made was a group effort, showing how committed they were to starting a family together. As the pregnancy went on, Julia's thoughts became deeper. She often talked about how thankful she was, not just for the baby growing inside her, but also for the path that had brought her to this point. She talked about the uncertainties she had formerly had, the nights she had questioned if she would ever be able to be a mother, and the resilience she had found in getting past those anxieties. Her tale struck a chord with many women who had gone through similar doubts, making her pregnancy more than just a personal milestone. It became a source of hope for everyone. Brandon's part in this chapter was just as important. His constant presence, gentle support, and ability to match Julia's enthusiasm all helped them feel stable. The man who was once thought to be shy and torn between loyalties showed new sides of himself when he became a father. He was no longer just the son who had to balance what his parents wanted with what his partner needed. He was going to be a parent, which meant he would have to take on a lot of responsibility and joy. Julia and those who had been following their tale could see this change. Fans said that he seemed to be ready for fatherhood even before the kid came, pointing out how calm and sure he was about the changes in their lives. The couple's extended relatives also had an impact. Brandon's parents, who were once very involved in the early problems of their relationship, were very happy to hear the news. The idea of becoming grandparents changed the family dynamic in a positive way, easing prior tensions and bringing everyone together. The overlapping borders of parental participation, which had earlier been a source of tension, began to change into a shared excitement for new life. Julia had a hard time fitting in with the Gibbs family, but now she felt connected to them via the universal joy of family growth. The pregnancy also brought up bigger ideas about love, strength, and how some experiences are the same for everyone. Julia and Brandon's story was unique in its details, yet it touched on feelings and milestones that people from all around the world can relate to. Many people can identify to the anxiety of not being able to have children, the relief of unexpected happiness, the changes that come with getting ready to be a parent, and the public sharing of private milestones. Maybe this is why their news got so much attention and why it seemed like more than simply another celebrity headline. As the due date got closer, the story of Julia and Brandon's lives went from guesswork to fact. Their story changed from one of if and whether to one of when and how. The pregnancy was already well underway, and it entered its later stages with both excitement and meticulous planning. Julia wrote about aspects of her journey for her followers, showing them how her body changed, what she thought about things, and how grateful she was. Brandon stood next to her, showing the quiet excitement of a guy getting ready to be a father. The couple talked about their hopes and plans for their child in the future. They talked about wanting to provide their children a life full of love, stability, and chances. Julia thought about how important cultural history is as she thought about her own trip from Russia to the United States. She thought of methods to pass on traditions while also accepting new ones. Brandon, who came from a family with strong morals, stressed how important it is to make a home that is safe and caring. Their visions came together to form a common optimism for the future that honored both of their roots and looked forward to all the good things that were to come. Julia Trubkina's pregnancy was important for more than just her own life. It became a metaphor of what can happen when love and strength come together, when hope replaces fear, and when personal problems become public celebrations. For fans, it was a chance to see a fresh chapter in a narrative they had been following for years. It was the start of motherhood for Julia and Brandon, the most important journey of all. Julia and Brandon had already crossed a line by the time their nursery was ready, with soft blankets and the promise of fresh life. They were no longer merely famous people on reality TV, or a married couple trying to fit in with a new culture. They were waiting to become parents, and soon their future would take the shape of tiny hands and feet, soft screams, and infinite firsts. Their love story, which had been sculpted by distance and differences, had developed into something big and lasting. Julia's pregnancy was not the end of a story arc in many ways. It was the start of one. It changed how they thought about their past problems, turning them from problems into the building blocks of their future. It reminded audiences that even if reality TV shows provide us a peek into the lives of its stars, the most real stories happen when the cameras aren't rolling, in the quiet moments of hope, fear, and joy that make us human. The pregnancy was both personal and communal for Julia and Brandon. It was private but yet shared. It was the best reminder that beneath every headline and social media post is the deep truth about the most universal journey of life: the making of a family. Their tale, portrayed via ultrasound pictures and getting ready for the nursery, as well as memories of earlier concerns and celebrations of present delight, will keep changing. But at the moment of announcement, with all the love coming in from fans and the quiet preparations going on inside their home, one thing was apparent. Not just for Julia Trubkina and Brandon Gibbs, but also for everyone who had been with them on their journey, a new chapter had begun. This gossip is over. If you liked the video, then give your opinion in the comment box and stay with us by subscribing the channel. Thank you.